I don't care how good a police officer you are, if you have a negligent discharge in the line of duty, you're gonna hear about it. Hi friends, welcome to today's badge cam lesson here at Active Self-Protection. I'm your host, John Correa.
I'm your co-host, Mike Wilbur. Today's video comes to us from the Van Nuys division of the LAPD.
This is not a paid endorsement, but I am a brand ambassador for Heckler and Koch for a reason. HK firearms are incredibly high quality, and when it's time to step up out of the entry tier, they're the only ones I recommend. You carry a gun just in case. Shouldn't it be an HK just in case? These officers are just rolling through the hood like it's 1988 and they are auditioning for the movie Colors when they see a man who they know has warrants out for his arrest for attempted murder. They know he is a known felon. So they're gonna roll on this guy and jam him up, as you can see right there. You can go watch with the audio in the description. So they're gonna jam this guy up because they know he's wanted and they're gonna tell him to pull over. But shockingly, our wanted felon is gonna decide he wants to ride off into the sunset on his bicycle, thinking that he is gonna get away from the patrol cruiser on his bike. That is, yeah, I mean, you know, he didn't get into the situation he is with great decision-making, and that bad decision-making continues. So they are gonna chase him through the parking lot here. He's gonna exit the parking lot. Eventually, he's gonna try to get away some more. And eventually, I'm gonna let you listen in on the badge cam here. It's gonna get a little fast and furious. So let's hear what the badge cams say at this point.
Bicycle. He is heading northbound Tyrone for victory.
Hey, you ready? If you're cool if I pin him in? Ready? Oh, shit! Get off the bike! Get on the ground!
Hey, put your hands up! Put your hands
Hey, I'm gonna secure the car.
They're still running on the north sidewalk.
We have shots fired, shots fired.
Something to the commander, shots has been fired. Let me get the first unit. Hey, roll on your stomach!
That's solo, sir.
Roll on your stomach! Roll on your stomach! Put your arms here. Put your arms here.
Turn off the car. Turn off the car. Get out. Do me a favor. Come on.
Do not reach for that gun!
Get over here. Go sit by that bus stop, all right?
Do not reach for that gun! Put your arms out to the side!
You saw on the first officer's badge cam that the narrative said he had an unintentional discharge. Now you're gonna see it happen on the second officer's badge cam. Let's listen in to his badge cam as the negligent discharge has already happened. Let's see what happens some more.
Hey, put the gun down! Put the gun down! Put the gun down! Drop the gun! Drop the gun! Don't touch the gun! Don't touch the gun! Hey, roll on your stomach! Roll on your stomach! Put your arms here. Don't reach for that gun! Don't reach for that gun! Do not reach for that gun!
I do want you to see in a little bit of slow-mo here as the guy's running away from the officer. You can see he turns and faces the officer with a firearm in his hand, raises that gun towards the officer, and then you're gonna see the officer do his very best to fill this guy in and smoke check him. He hit him at least once, and they did get this guy into custody. So I don't know how many times they hit him. They said on the release from LAPD that he had non-life-threatening injuries. You can see his gun right there. So he was armed. They did get him and hit him at least once. From what I can gather from the news stories, all the other rounds that the officer fired did not hurt anybody else. I don't know where they ended up and what kind of property damage was done, but our dude is gonna face some significant time in the Hooskow for being a felon in possession. So as well as for the attempted murder charges, I'm sure he's gonna spend some time in a California gated community. Now listen, everybody, as we start talking about this incident, we're gonna separate. The ND is an issue and we gotta deal with it, and I hope you saw it, I mean, you heard it. And then the shooting of the perp, those are two separate issues and two separate incidents, and the same officer did really great on one, not so great on the other. Let's talk about it. All right, Mike, I think we got to kind of just get right to it, that they really want to kind of get towards this guy. Well, let's talk about the first officer first, because, you know, as he starts running with his partner's got a gun up, telling the guy to drop the gun, and he turns around and says, I'm going to secure the car. And I think maybe it was just adrenaline from the unintentional discharge, but that's weird to me, man.
That's definitely weird. I know people do goofy stuff sometimes, even cops under pressure. You know, a gun was just discharged inside the car, which is weird and unusual and not a thing that happens every day. At the end of the day, John, as his backup, he needed to not worry so much about the car. I mean, obviously, we don't want the car to get stolen. We don't want people to get police equipment and end up in a pursuit. I get all that. But right now, what's important now is helping your partner catch this bad guy, because he's now in a foot pursuit with a guy you know to have a gun. So for whatever reason, he decided to secure the car. Not sure why. I'm sure he has been harangued by his coworkers to no end as a result of that in the interim. So he's already paid his penance for that, I'm sure.
Yeah, and of course, you know, I've got to give shame on the LAPD for not providing, remote mics for their officers and requiring them to hold on to their bricks. Now, let's talk about the officer here and our problems with it showed up. You notice here that, number one, he had a gun in his hand while he was in the car. We don't recommend that. We don't recommend that because of exactly what we saw here. Number two, he transferred that gun over to his non-dominant hand. Why did he do that? Because he knew he was going to have to open the door. The answer then is to put the gun in your holster. That's where it should stay. Because, and the very reason why we say don't get a gun in your hand when you're in the car like this, and certainly don't transfer it to your non-dominant hand, is exactly what we saw here, Mike. And you know, I hate to say I told you so, but this is exactly why we say this stuff.
This is one of those things that I can't claim to not be guilty of in the past. Working gangs in Southern California, I thought several times, you know, jumping out on a really good crook who we knew was a violent actor, drawing my gun before I got out of the car. And in retrospect now, I can see that that was never really necessary and or a good idea for exactly what we saw here, transferring it to your non-dominant hand and then reaching over and using your dominant hand to do something grabby when your finger's on the trigger and your other hand wants to get grabby along with it. It's a parasympathetic reflex. It's a real thing. And this is like really a textbook example of that. Look, if you're jumping on a bad guy, I get opening the door before the car comes to a close and forcing it open with your foot and then get out and then draw your gun. If you've got a big old bucket SLS on the side, it takes almost zero time to draw that gun. So as tempting as it is, and the fuzzy, you know, warm fuzzy that you might get from having it in your hand before you get out of the car is not worth the potential downside, as we saw. As it turns out, this Crown Vic had made it from at least 2011 to 2023, and I just don't think the dashboard made it, John. I couldn't find any news articles about the dashboard or the vent to know if they made it through this in one piece.
And one of my big problems here is he's got his gun in his non-dominant hand. So how much time has he got training to make sure that his trigger finger is high and at home? So again, we always talk about your trigger finger is either at home or at work, and you want it at home, and he hasn't trained that to automaticity yet. And so you can see here, just barely at the bottom of the screen, that his finger is on the trigger. And where is that gun pointed? Not pointed at the ballistic panel to the right. He's got a ballistic panel in the door that if God forbid you got to have your hand on, you know, the gun and in a non-dominant place. But of course you want to watch out not pointing at your hand. Thank God he didn't point it at his hand, because of the parasympathetic squeeze. Now he's got a bullet through the dashboard, and that dashboard is absolutely not a deadly threat in the moment. That is absolutely an unintended discharge. We would call that a negligent discharge. It was negligence of the rules of safe firearms handling that caused that. I'm not saying that makes this officer a terrible human being. I know plenty of great human beings who have had negligent discharges. I'm trying to get all of us to recognize this was a huge mistake, and this is the very reason, the textbook example of why we ask you not to do this as bad tactics.
Yeah, concur. I have a lot to add to that, John. You know, it's one of those things, and we saw another video not long ago. We caught a lot of heck in the comments for our analysis of an officer who was going through a door and a round went off, and he certainly appeared to not have intended to shoot that round off, and then immediately out of his mouth was, "Oh, he's pointing something at me." You know, whether that's true or not, and I can't say that the guy was or wasn't pointing something. It didn't look like he was, but that didn't look good. And then when he then makes that spontaneous utterance and basically says something that, well, I'm not going to say is true or not true, but whatever, he said what he said, and now he's got to deal with having said that. This officer, I don't think, said anything. And what this was, at the end of the day, this was an accident. It was a negligence issue, but there was no malice there. He wasn't, he didn't do anything to intentionally try to injure anyone, and I'm sure this will never happen to him again after this. And as I said, after being harangued by his colleagues for this, I'm sure that'll never happen to him again either.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, was he justified in shooting this guy? Unequivocally, absolutely, 100%, without a question, yes. The dude is literally pointing a gun at him. You can see that clear as a bell here. I do want to say, Mike, that, man, look at the backstop here. And one of the things we talk about is you always have to keep a firearm pointed in the direction of least consequence. Here, the least consequence is directly at the felon who is trying to kill you and pointing a gun at you, absolutely. But if you cannot guarantee that that gun is pointed at the felon, if you miss by just a degree or two, now your gun is pointed at the cars behind you and it is pointed in a direction of incredibly high consequence. You have no margin for error here. Your margin for success very slim, and if you can't guarantee a hit, you cannot take this shot.
Yeah, I mean, this guy at least helped out in as much as it looks like he always got extra cheese on his Whopper, so that helps that he's a slightly larger target than the average criminal. Most of the gang members I arrested were rather slender, prison fit, as we called it. Here's the bottom line. You've got to be good. Your marksmanship has got to be top notch as a law enforcement officer, because you don't know if you're going to be put in a position like this. This is a poop sandwich that everyone has to take a bite of. He should be shooting back at this guy or shooting at this guy. But as you said, the backstop is just hot garbage. There's people everywhere. There's vehicles moving. I think one thing he could have maybe done, and again, this is Monday morning quarterbacking, I wasn't there, but if you're watching this in training, officers, consider maybe just booking it to the right and offlining. First of all, it's going to make it harder for him to hit you, and maybe try to find a better backstop. Put him in front of a better backstop that he's in front of now. With that said, these are makeable shots, and we don't know how many times he was hit. The news story didn't tell us, and we don't know where other rounds may have gone. We're going to see some rounds hit the concrete wall here, so the rounds weren't all completely accurate. You've just got to be as locked on as you can with your marksmanship, because you don't get to pick the moment you have to pull the trigger. You don't get to pick the moment and the place of your gunfight. The bad guy picks it for you, and this is what he picked.
Yeah. And listen, we're going to see those two shots here. You see two puffs of smoke from the block wall. So he's missing low. We see that all the time. When we see low and low left, that's almost always a grip issue. Remember, grip is the master, sights set the pace, trigger is the servant. You think you might be getting in a gunfight with somebody, remind yourself of that mantra. Practice it on the range. Go in the ASP Unlimited app. Take the evidence-based pistol skills class. Work on those skills a little bit so that you're way more than just passing the qualification, but you're highly proficient with your marksmanship. Now again, this officer is 100% justified in these shots, but look at the backstop. The backstop here is terrible, so recognize that direction of least consequence is a very narrow band here. Your margin for success, very, very slim. And then as these officers are gonna come out and around, Mike, I do think he does a pretty good job here of trying to get the poor civilian, the poor private citizen, out of the Mustang and get him the heck out of the way so that they can take this guy into custody. And that guy probably needs to hire a cleaning company to clean the upholstery out too, you think?
Yeah, as Jeremy Clarkson liked to say with some frequency, some poo has almost certainly come out of this poor guy in the Mustang. Here's a training point, John. I think we should be, trainers, instructors of agencies should be considering during live fire, during force-on-force training, during their extra tactical exercises with firearms or with sims or whatever, consider having innocents in your scenario who you have to get out of the way, because that happens in real life. So consider having some role players or officers who aren't in the training there in a car, or freaking out and screaming and yelling, or the ever-present screaming girlfriend / wife who screams, "Oh my God, did you shoot my boyfriend or husband?" Because that can help make the training more realistic. John, at the end of the day, these officers did a pretty darn good job. RIP to the Crown Vic dashboard and to that block wall. But at the end of the day, they came up against a really bad dude who was wanted for murder or attempted murder, and they got him into custody. So kudos LAPD, and I think they covered their asp.